Greetings, comrades. You know, from a very young age I was attracted to everything mysterious, enigmatic, and sometimes even paranormal. I loved all those stories about horrible serial killers, mysterious disappearances, and supernatural phenomena. And of course, since I was born in Russia, the story of Dyatlov Pass always seemed to be the story for me. The close-knit group of experienced tourists suddenly falling victim to something unknown, and most importantly, no witnesses, who now, 60 years later, could tell us anything about the story. What could be more intriguing? Of course, a nearly identical story in which there is such a witness after all, and not just any witness, but a survivor. Valentina Utachenko, who at the young age of 17 became the only survivor of a hike through Khamar-Daban mountain range in Buryatia. She experienced some horrible moments when all the members of her hiking group seemed to lose their minds overnight and died in front of her eyes in a matter of hours. Today we will try to understand what happened in that fateful August night of 1993 in Buryatia, and the main thing, what made Valentina stay silent about the events of those days for more than 25 years. What particularly appeals to me about this case is its relative obscurity. Until October 2020, when Nick Crowley dug it up, there was not a single video on the English-speaking section of YouTube about the incident. After that, other creators paid attention to it, but they all discussed pretty much the same theories. So today I will try not only to repeat all the same points that were listed before me, but also to look at this case from the inside, taking into account the national flavor, so to speak. So, if you are already familiar with the Khamar-Daban incident, perhaps today you will learn something new for yourself. If not, make yourself comfortable. It's gonna be a wild ride. First of all, a slight digression. I have already said that this case was practically unknown in the English-speaking community until 2020. But if you think that things were very different for Russians, you are wrong. In fact, very few people knew about this story until 2019. That all changed on March 1st, 2019, when Valentina Utachenko suddenly appeared on Russia's biggest TV show, Pust Говорят. Naturally, this caused a furor, as the story began to be discussed everywhere. People compared it to the Dyatlov Pass story and found dozens of frightening similarities. Let's start with Valentina's tale. She was a part of the hiking group of Lyudmila Korovina, a 41-year-old tourist instructor. The group consisted of Korovina, 3 young girls and 3 young men, who came to Buryatia from Kazakhstan on August 2, 1993, and set out on a route along the Khamar-Daban mountains. It is worth noting that Korovina had been to these mountains several times before and knew the trail well enough. In addition, another group, featuring Korovina's daughter, was traveling along a nearby route, and they were to meet in a week's time. They weren't having much luck with the weather. Cold rains were pouring down over the mountains, but the group traveled relatively quickly and stuck to the route, until August 5th. We only know what happened on that day from Valentina's testimony. On August 4th, the group stops for the night at an altitude of 2,300 meters. It is worth noting that this part of the mountains is completely devoid of shelter, only rocks, grass and wind. Why Korovina, an experienced tourist, considered this place to be a good one to spend the night is a big mystery, because there were trees within a few kilometers and there were much better places around. The next night the weather got worse, and Korovina decided to change the place of overnight stay by bringing the group slightly lower down the mountain. During the descent, one of them suddenly felt sick. Foam came out of his mouth, blood came out of his ears, he began to roll around on the ground. Surprisingly, the victim was the most durable and healthy member, 24-year-old Alexander, who died in a matter of minutes at about 11 am. Korovina stays with the guy and tells the rest of the group to go ahead to the woods without her. Do you think that's the creepiest thing about the story? It was not. Just a few minutes later, the other members of the group exhibited the same symptoms, and in a much more bizarre form, resembling some kind of a collective insanity. Victoria, Timur and Tatiana fell down and started tearing off their clothes. Some were hiding behind drugs, some were beating their heads against them, and some were screaming and lashing out as Valentina tried to drag them to the shelter. Yes, maybe 16 and 17-year-olds could have lost their minds en masse after the gruesome death of a comrade, but a 41-year-old experienced instructor? Unlikely. Everyone in the group was affected, except for Valentina. She realized that she could not take any of her comrades with her, so she goes down to the shelter for the night alone. The girl spent the next night there, and in the morning she returned to the campsite. By this time, everyone who stayed on the mountain was dead, except for Korovina. She, with the last of her strength, pointed out the direction in which Valentina should go, and passed away. Valentina took a map, gathered some food from backpacks, and began the search for rescuers. It took her several days of walking along rivers and abandoned power lines to find people before a Ukrainian tourist group happened to spot her. By the way, on the 5th day of her journey, Valentina spotted a village nearby, but as she got closer, she realized that it had long been abandoned. Imagine her feelings at that moment. It took emergency crews another 8 days to find the bodies of the other 6 people. This, however, only raised more questions. The bodies were lying side by side. 3 of them had no shoes on, and the instructor was lying on top of Alexander. How exactly did 6 hardy hikers manage to pass away in a matter of minutes? The weirdest thing about the story is that all night, even before the first death, the guys were apparently soaking and freezing, but they didn't even try to keep themselves warm. Each of them had a sleeping bag and a plastic sheet, and this was left untouched. Everything was dry and in their backpacks. Why their leader took no action is inexplicable. Just as inexplicable was the general panic that followed the first death. The only one who retained a lucid mind was Valentina. Utachenko herself, years later, attributes her own survival to good physical training and prefers not to speak of the terrible incident in the mountains. By the way, while reading all the articles about this story, I came across 2 strange things. The first, Valentina clearly indicates that Alexander felt unwell at around 10 AM on August 5th, and all the others almost immediately after him. She has returned to the camp on the morning of August 6th, when everyone was already dead. What has happened in that time frame? In addition, Valentina for some reason did not reveal the tragedy to the Ukrainian tourists when they found her. It was only when they met another group that included Valentina's acquaintances that she told them the gruesome story. However, we can blame it all on the stress the fragile 17-year-old girl had to endure during 2 terrible weeks in the mountains and forests. Now, let's talk about the investigation of the incident. The official cause of the group's death was declared to be hypothermia, and in addition, the incompetence of the instructor. I think we all understand the problems with this version. People do not smash their heads against rocks and do not die in a matter of minutes from hypothermia. Besides, apart from the Korovina's group, there were several other groups in the same region in those days. Everyone was fine. The only thing I find interesting in this version is the fact that some people who knew Korovina claimed that she adhered to the ideology of extreme tourism and sometimes kinda tested the limits of her disciples, forcing them to eat very little and cover huge distances in one sitting. In addition, the official examination claimed that the members of the group had pulmonary edema and protein dystrophy, a symptom of malnutrition. But this contradicts Valentina's words. She claimed that the group had been eating normally, 4 times a day. Where could severe dystrophy have come from? A slightly more adequate version is altitude sickness. Its manifestation is strongly tied to 3 factors: a sharp drop in temperature, high humidity, and drop in atmospheric pressure. Valentina Utachenko herself supports this version. The woman believes that most of the members of the group had a sudden onset of pulmonary edema. The symptoms fit: foam, blood at the mouth, inadequate behavior, but blood coming out of the ears, and the altitude of 2,300 meters is far from extreme. The light stage of mountain sickness usually occurs starting from at least 3,000 meters, a light form. Foaming at the mouth is not a light form. There were versions of ozone or chemical poisoning. Some believe that the group was caught in a high concentration of ozone, caused by a strong thunderstorm front, which resulted in weakened tourists' bodies not being able to withstand it. Authors think it was a plant found in the backpacks of Korovina and Alexander, Rhodiola rosea, also known as golden root. It is believed that it is a kind of a stimulant, allowing to build endurance, but in overdose it can cause heart failure. Experts did attribute Alexander's death to a heart attack. By the way, for the fans of mysticism, it is believed that there may be an entrance to the magical Shambhala in these mountains, guarded by mountain spirits. And according to the legends of the local people, the golden root must never be taken out of the forests. You can only use it there in order to survive. Local shamans said that Lyudmila's actions, who probably collected it for sale, angered the spirits, and the entire team paid the price for it. By the way, remember that abandoned village that Valentina found on her way? Maybe its inhabitants had also angered the evil spirits once in the past. There are also quite strange non-mystical versions, like the group inhaling sulfuric acid vapors. Allegedly, the poisonous emission from somewhere in China did not disperse due to the temperature inversion, but was transported over a great distance and then formed a large contaminated space. Alexander was foaming and bleeding from the mouth, which are typical signs of inhalation poisoning. But this does not explain the mass insanity, and it is hard not to notice a poisoning with strong acid during an autopsy. Among the versions discussed was, for example, the influence of infrasound. You know those stories about lost ships which are being found sometime after their disappearance, but without the crew, who seem to have gone crazy and jumped into the sea altogether. Some believe that these ships are caught in the areas affected by the so-called voice of the sea, the infrasound generated by sea waves. And supposedly, some cliffs during a strong wind can become an infrasound generator of enormous power, which causes panic, unaccountable horror, and can even lead to cardiac arrest. Infrasound is probably the best explanation for the mass madness that occurred, but I personally doubt very much that two particular rocks in that region that very day suddenly decided to become infrasound generators, and then never emitted that infrasound ever again. Particularly popular among YouTubers is the nerve gas theory, and specifically the Novichok. Both Kdaba and Wendigoon present it as the most likely one. They say that in 1993, maybe a few months before that fateful August, Novichok was tested in Buryatia. The gas was left in the mountains to gradually dissipate, and then a tourist group led by Korovina accidentally stumbled upon it. Sounds good, if it were not for one small fact. Mr. Vil Mirzayanov, whose memoirs are almost the main source of information about the Novichok, is quite clear about the time and place of its main tests. The city of Nukus, Uzbekistan, 1989. A bit far away, as you can see. And even if nerve gas tests were once conducted in the Khamardaban area, can you imagine a situation in which this gas was accumulated for months in a particular place in the mountains, killed 6 tourists, and then mysteriously dissipated a few hours later when Valentina returned to check the bodies? I can't. So I would dismiss this version as well, at least in the form it's sold in the other videos. So, if I'm so critical of all the versions I've heard before, then should I have my own one? You see, the analysis of this case are based on one assumption, that Valentina's testimony in 1993 and her words in 2019 are pure truth. Because there's literally nothing in the case apart from it. The bodies were found 20 days after the death of the group members, when there were not much to be said about them anymore. And let's be honest, nobody even tried. Froze to death, that's it. Konstantin Yugov, head of the Bureau of Forensic Medicine of the Republic of Buryatia, spoke about this in an interview. When we received 6 bodies of tourists for examination, we were tasked to determine the cause of death, to identify any injuries, and to rule out a violent death. The experts worked in 3 directions. 1. To establish and prove the general hypothermia as the cause of death of all the corpses. 2. To identify whether there may have been mass poisoning, bad quality products, toxic substances. And 3. To find any mechanical injuries. Interesting wording, isn't it? The first task assigned to the experts is to establish and prove general hypothermia. If the task was set, they had to accomplish it. So they did. In the end, no criminal case was ever opened. Hypothermia, that's all. Everything was blamed on the weather and the group leader's mistakes. Very convenient. By the way, I said that the only facts in the story are from Valentina's testimony, but it's not so simple here either. The fact is that there are at least 4 versions of her story. The first version is the one I originally told you, in which Lyudmila Korovina was still alive when Valentina returned to their camp next morning, and it was she who pointed out in which direction Valentina must continue the route. The second is in Valentina's official explanatory memorandum, according to which none of the group members had a pulse even before Valentina descended the slope for the night. The third was reported by the rescuer who found the team. He said Valentina described the events to him as follows. Alexander suddenly felt ill and Korovina dragged him on her back for some time, while the rest of the group descended without them. Valentina went with the group and witnessed their mass insanity. Then Valentina went back up to Korovina, who told her that Alexander had also died, and then she died herself. Finally, the fourth version of Valentina's testimony is also recorded by the rescuers and appeared in their official report. It says that Korovina died of a heart attack, Denis began to hide behind the rocks, Victoria and Timur probably went crazy, and Tatiana beat her head against the rocks. And any of these versions doesn't look like hypothermia, oxygen deprivation, or even poisoning. Also, why so many of them? Yes, wandering through the woods for 2 weeks probably leaves a certain imprint on your psyche, and you don't remember the details of everything that was around you on that terrible night clearly. But still. The other thing that confuses me about this whole story is the 25 years that Valentina has been silently building her new life, only to suddenly go to the biggest TV show in the country and share this story with general public, adding another, 5th version of events. What could have kept the girl silent and out of the public eye for so many years? Stress? Fear? So, if I don't like all the other versions, do I have my own? There is one, or rather 2. The first is rather trivial and cynical. What really killed them was hypothermia, and the mistakes and the extreme methods of their instructor. The hypothermia killed everyone except Alexander and Lyudmila, who had a heart attack one after another. Just not in a couple of minutes, but in the 24 hours that passed between Alexander's death and the morning of August 6th. What exactly happened that day is an open question. Perhaps not exactly what Valentina told everyone later, and some of the details, like a mass insanity, were made up by her afterwards. Why? The only reasonable explanation I can find is that maybe they had a disagreement and she left the group for the night, only to return next morning and find them all dead. She kinda blamed herself for abandoning them, so she made this mass insanity thing up. But this version is rather harsh. I definitely don't want to just accuse a 17-year-old girl who had a traumatic experience of lying for, unclear purposes, and this version doesn't explain all the weirdness. Besides, if those very extreme methods of the instructor were true, then why is Valentina still covering for her 30 years later and claiming that everything was going fine? So there's a second one. But I'll tell you right away, it is probably crazier than a theory that they were all killed by an evil Yeti. Could there be some influential person in this story who strongly advised Valentina not to bring up some details? Imagine that you are a 17-year-old girl lying in a hospital recovering from a horror experience, and one day a respectable man in uniform comes into your ward and says gently, "Valentina, a terrible accident happened. But you are so lucky. You are alive. You have your whole life ahead of you. Of course, we will help you to get settled in life in the future. You do not really want to recall this nightmare, right? And why should you? Our experts say it was only hypothermia, a tragic accident. So, Valentina, can you not discuss it with anyone, okay?" I think you would accept this tempting offer too. Why did Valentina break her silence in 2019? You never know. For example, maybe in 25 years this man in uniform could become a retiree or lose all his influence, and Valentina decided that her promise was fulfilled. But if my schizo theory is correct, and all the inconsistencies in this story are due to the fact that Valentina was asked not to reveal all the details, the question remains, why? What exactly these hypothetical influential people want to hide? Hardly just the incompetence of the Buret experts, who happily blamed everything on the instructor and cold, but the testing of some new kind of weapon into the zone of which the tourists accidentally got? The question remains, what kind of weapon? Foam at the mouth, blood from the ears, sudden panic and terror, the absence of any traces on the bodies. All this can be explained by both the infrasound and the nerve gas. What to choose? I still don't think it was Novichok. Nerve gas certainly doesn't have the kind of selectivity that kills 6 out of 7 people in a minute and leaves the 7th one perfectly healthy. But infrasound. The most implausible thing in the infrasound theory was how it appeared in the mountains, because it requires very specific conditions. And if we imagine that this sound was of artificial origin. After all, we know for a fact that since the 1990s the US military and private companies have researched infrasonic devices that could be used for military purposes. Why couldn't the same thing happen in the late USSR, early Russia? The only question that remains is, if that's the case, then how did Valentina survive this terrible impact? Was she just lucky and able to slide down the slope in time? Or is this the part of the story Valentina is hesitant to tell, even almost 30 years later?